Hi, I'm Michelle Dixon, and welcome back to The Shattering Place, the podcast that explores the living science and true stories of multidimensionality in service to healing, awakening, and the evolution of consciousness. We have already looked at the cracks in materialism and the body as a conscious field. We have explored the relational field where our minds are no longer private. And most recently, we navigated the intergenerational field, realizing that we carry the resonance of our ancestors in our very selves. If you haven't yet listened to episodes 1 to 4, please do. Each episode builds on the last. Together, they form a living map of multidimensional healing and transformation. Today, we continue the journey with episode 5, The Future Memory. In this episode, we challenge the final boundary of the materialist mind, linear time. We're going to explore how the future may not just be a destination we are moving towards, but a frequency that is already reaching back to guide us, providing the blueprint for the evolution of our species. Before we dive in, a word about working with me one-on-one. While my traditional clinical practice is currently at capacity, I am opening a different door for those ready to move beyond baseline into their true evolutionary mission. It's called the 90-day structural recalibration. I'll share more about how this immersive partnership works and how to apply at the end of the episode, so stay tuned. Now, let's get into future memory. In episode 4, we explored how the past lives in our cells. If we accept that the past still energizes our cells, we must confront the logical mirror. Why do we assume the future is a blank slate? I want to dive deeper into what it means when it seems that the future is reaching out to us. First, let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt like you have arrived at an experience in your life that you always knew would happen? The medium Tyler Henry writes in his second book, The Here and Hereafter, that a premonition is like a memory you've forgotten. There's this sense that what is transpiring has already happened somehow, and only now are you experiencing it or remembering it, as it were. I first had this experience myself when I was 17 years old. I used to keep a dream journal faithfully because I had, and I still continue to have, so many crazy dreams. And I noticed that the more I paid attention to them by writing them down, the more I would predict the future in those dreams. And it's a habit I highly encourage if you also want to see how much you can tap into the future. For me, at first, it was little things like that the weekend would be unusually hot or that I would find a coin on the sidewalk outside of my school. But then one day I had a dream that was a little more personal and much more serious. I dreamt that it was Thanksgiving and we were lowering a casket into the ground and standing around crying, but I couldn't quite see who it was. And then the next part of the dream was that it was Christmas and someone wasn't there who was supposed to be there. Just a few weeks after the dream, just before Thanksgiving, my grandfather passed away really suddenly from a stroke. The future, as it turned out, was already there in a way, and time was just catching up. Here's the thing, though. Most of us view time as a horizontal track where we're always at the leading edge, moving forward, but multidimensionality suggests a vertical stack. So bear with me as I expand on this metaphor to help you visualize what I'm talking about. In this view, the future is a landscape of potential frequencies already vibrating in the field, and at any point, we already have access to it. So we can think of horizontal time as a corridor where you can only see what's in front of you or where you are at the particular moment. In this metaphor, the past is dark behind you and you're going forward, only forward, and the future is a door that you can only open when you get there. In contrast, think of vertical time as a glass elevator inside a building where you can see all the floors like in one of those big fancy hotels. So everything is happening right now on every single floor, and somehow through your mind or your frequency or however you imagine it, through your dreams perhaps, you can send the elevator 5 floors up and have a look at what's happening in the future. Or you can send it down and see what happened in the past. But all the activity on each floor is happening simultaneously. To put it another way, in the realm of multidimensionality, the shift from horizontal to vertical time is the difference between living chapter by chapter and witnessing not just the whole book, but the entire library. Let's start with the sequential corridor of horizontal time. Horizontal time is the time of the materialist world. It is the chronos of the Greeks, linear, quantitative, and relentless. In this model, time is a one way street where the past is a graveyard of things that no longer exist, and the future is again an empty room we haven't yet entered. We experience life as a series of cause and effect. This creates a specific somatic state, urgency. Because we believe the past is behind us and the future is ahead, we are constantly running away from one and towards the other, never fully inhabiting the present. The present, in fact, is actually the portal to every single level. It is the elevator in this metaphor. And that is why vertical time is also the eternal now. So, this is an experience people have in near death experiences. When they die, they seem to have what feels like hours or days or months of adventure, and then they return to the body to find that only a few minutes have passed. Vertical time is the time of the field. It's very much like what the Greeks called kairos, an opportunistic time, a qualitative, opportune moment that exists outside the clock. In this model, you're not moving through time. Time is all around you, and everything is just really a matter of the perspective from the level you're currently on. So while we often feel trapped in the horizontal, the linear flow of like daily chores, survival, the relentless ticking of that chronos, there is a profound tradition of the vertical. Thinkers have been contemplating vertical time for a long time. Take Gurdjieff, a Greco Armenian mystic who brought what he called the fourth way to the West in the early 20th century. Gurdjieff was the ultimate provocateur of the vertical line. He taught that every human exists at the intersection of two lines. The horizontal line is the line of time, your physical life, aging, and external events. But the vertical line is the line of being, your level of consciousness. Gurdjieff believed that most people live only on the horizontal, but that the goal of human evolution is to move up that vertical line, which fundamentally changes your relationship to time itself. Then we have the philosopher Gaston Bachelard. He was a poet of science who spent his life bridging the gap between hard physics and the human imagination. Bachelard spoke of epistemological breaks, moments when old ways of thinking must shatter to allow for a new level of understanding. He coined the term poetic instant to describe a spiritual breakthrough where we stop the horizontal march of ordinary experience to touch a moment of eternity. This resonates deeply with the work of Thomas Merton, the 20th century Trappist monk. Merton explored this verticality through the lens of the false self, that ego driven identity tied to our anxieties and social status, the version of us that is constantly exhausted by the horizontal world. Merton believed that by going inward, we find the true self, the part of us anchored in a reality that doesn't shatter when the world does. Bear with me. This is the crucial point here. The vertical is not just about escaping linear time. It's the realization that when we do, we are inevitably experiencing something higher, something more evolved. This vertical axis is our kairos. It is the opportune moment when we pierce the noise to tap into an invisible, abundant source. When we shift our perspective from the hallway to the high rise, we are accessing a state of being where the future, where evolution itself is a frequency that we can inhabit right now. By the mid 1900s, the philosopher Jean Gebser described this not just as a personal shift, but as a collective mutation. He argued that we are currently mutating into an integral stage of consciousness. In this new structure, time becomes transparent. It is a unified, living whole. We inhabit what he called the ever present origin, a state where our spiritual source is vibrating right here in the immediate present. Gebser called this latency, the fact that the future is already embedded and visible within the structure of this very moment. Now, it's no coincidence that these maps of the vertical were charted during the greatest fractures of the 20th century. Gurdjieff was teaching the line of being as the Russian Revolution dismantled the world he knew. Bachelard gave us the vertical instant in 1932, just as the global order began to tremble between the wars. By the time Gebser and Merton were writing in the 1950s, the world had been physically and psychologically leveled. So, this means that they weren't theorizing from a place of comfort. They were finding vertical hope in the middle of the ruins. They proved that when the horizontal timeline is most broken, that vertical axis becomes our only reliable technology for survival and evolution. In this century, Cynthia Bourgeot, a modern day mystic, Episcopal priest, and teacher, brings this entire lineage into the present through her wisdom tradition. She identifies the heart as a sophisticated organ of perception, a precise instrument we use to navigate the vertical axis, very reminiscent of the Heart Maths Institute work, which I've mentioned in previous episodes. So, as she points out, while the brain is busy processing this horizontal linear sequence of events, the heart perceives the whole. Bourgeot maps what she calls the imaginal realm, an energetic field where the ancestral past and the evolutionary future are not just memories or possibilities. They are active present tense influences. By grounding our awareness in the heart, we access a non linear reality. We stop being victims of the clock and we start participating in the field where cause originates. This is how we find stability in the shattering. We put the mind in the heart to witness the simultaneous reality that lives right behind the now. Now, this little foray into philosophy is inevitably partial and represents my own personal study. There are so many voices in this conversation, but I wanted just to give you a sense of how conversations about time, linearity, and the future they're not only mine, and they're not new, and they're certainly not just reserved for spiritual and personal development or 5D circles. In fact, before we look at the modern science of precognition, tapping into that future now, we have to acknowledge that for the shamanic practitioner, linear time has always been an illusion. In the shamanic worldview, the future is a landscape we can physically visit to retrieve information, and the past is a living territory where healing can still occur. Shamanism operates on the fact that the soul is not bound by the body's location in time. By entering an altered state of consciousness, shifting the internal frequency, the practitioner steps off the horizontal track of the tribe's daily survival and enters a dream time, as it's called in many cultures, including the Aboriginal culture where I live in Australia, or simply non ordinary reality. In this space, all events occur simultaneously. The shaman is scouting a territory that already exists. showing that our ability to remember the future is one of the oldest technologies of the human spirit. It is, in fact, a facet of human experience that is now being studied in various spaces. For example, parapsychologist Dean Radin studies nonlinear time through precognition or presentiment. His research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences shows that the human body physically reacts to emotional stimuli seconds before they occur. In one study, participants' heart rates and skin conductance shifted in anticipation of a disturbing image before they were shown it, before the computer had even selected it. This proves that our nervous system is constantly sensing the ripples of events yet to happen, which brings us back to the many worlds theory we touched upon in episode 1. If every quantum decision splits reality into new branches or new timelines, then the future is actually a vast web of probable outcomes existing simultaneously. So maybe, as I suggest in my fictional story in my novel IKONA, maybe this concept isn't just fiction. We aren't locked into a single fixed fate. Rather, we're navigating a sea of timelines, and every choice we make is a steering maneuver that aligns our frequency with a specific version of tomorrow. When we understand that these future worlds are possibly already there, waiting for a resonant match, the pressure of predicting the future vanishes. It's replaced by the power of selecting the future, or as some say, aligning to it. Now, I'm sure you've heard of choosing your timeline out here in the spiritual personal development space. But when did this language really take hold? It's a very interesting question for me because it's something I've been following from my early childhood days. I believe that this radical perspective was really first championed by Jane Roberts in the 1960s through the Seth material. I grew up on these books. Maybe you've heard of Seth Speaks. It's a foundational text, and dozens more followed. Her channeling of Seth was really the first major public emergence of trance channeling, and it reshaped our understanding of reality more than most people realized. Seth, which was Jane's higher self that she channeled through her, introduced the concept of simultaneous time, the idea that the past, the present, and the future are simply kind of like different rooms in the same house, perceived as linear only because of the camouflage of our physical senses. Seth taught us that choice points are the engines of reality. When you make a decision, you are shifting your consciousness into a different probable future that already exists. What many don't realize is the extent to which this material really influenced the modern psychological landscape. By introducing the core tenet that you create your own reality, Seth shifted the focus from biological destiny to the individual as an active architect of experience. This radically influenced the birth of neuro-linguistic programming, modern hypnotherapy, and positive psychology. That is, change work modalities that focus on potential and not just wounding. All of these approaches establish that our external world is a, to some extent, projection of internal core beliefs, which paved the way for the precursors of cognitive behavioral therapy and deeply informed somatic psychology because it popularized the notion that the body is a materialization of psychic energy. It's not just biology. I believe that the popularity of the Seth material and everything it represented moved therapy away from clinical diagnosis and towards the reclamation of personal sovereignty. In hypnotherapy and NLP, for example, we guide a client to step into a future version of themselves, someone who has already integrated a past trauma. NLP treats this as like a frequency alignment. By sensing the somatic weight and the clarity of that future self, you're borrowing the blueprint from a timeline where success is already a fact. You are using the body as a bridge to pull that future frequency into the present moment to facilitate immediate healing. Now, we see a similar mechanism in parts work, such as internal family systems. Often we encounter a burdened part of ourselves, a child frozen in a past moment of terror, for example. When the self, that is, our most whole and together and wise self, the self witnesses and heals that child, we are performing an act of nonlinear rescue. From the perspective of that child part, a future self has arrived from a dimension they couldn't yet see to offer safety. The success of this model confirms that our consciousness is not locked in one part of the timeline. We are capable of reaching across the internal timeline to offer ourselves the grace we didn't have at the time. Let's talk about the visitation of the future self as well, because many people report experiences in their darkest hours of a sudden, unexplained sense of comfort, a visitation by a presence that feels both foreign and deeply familiar. There are countless stories of individuals who, years later, realized that they were the one who reached back in time. In a moment of current strength, they find themselves thinking of their younger, suffering self with such intense a love and compassion and a protective instincts that they're actually sending that energy through the field. Often, then, upon reflection, they realize that the angel or the guide that they felt years ago was actually their own future self, closing the loop of time to ensure their own survival and growth. I've experienced this in my own practice and life. There have been times when I was at my knees and suffering and felt the calm presence of a loving energy near me, telling me that actually I had all the resources I needed to get through it and all would be well. And in my life, there have been seasons when, for no apparent reason, as I sat in meditation, I would suddenly think of younger versions of me suffering and would send them love and support, only realizing as I was doing it that, in fact, the presence I had sensed at that time was the version of me now sitting in meditation, speaking towards the past. Now, it would be remiss of me not to mention some conspiracies which obviously I cannot prove about time travel. There are persistent whispers of government experiments regarding time travel. You've probably heard of some of them, like Project Looking Glass or the Montauk Project. According to popular lore, the Looking Glass device in the project of the same name has revealed branching timelines that eventually collapse or converge. Conspiracy theorists often claim that after a certain date, which was frequently cited as late 2012, the device could no longer distinguish between multiple paths, suggesting a fixed future or a major shift in human consciousness. Fascinating. And okay, these sorts of stories often live in the realm of conspiracy. Nonetheless, their existence in our collective psyche is valuable. They reflect, I think, an intuitive knowing that time is a dimension that can be navigated creatively. And it reflects that part of us that knows perhaps we will figure this out one day. And if, on the other hand, these conspiracies are true to whatever extent they may be, they might also confirm from a modern scientific point of view that different futures exist as possibilities and that the powers that be are interested in which timeline the collective inhabits and is moving towards, which all reinforces the idea that we seem to have a choice. We're not victims of fate, we're participants in choosing what eventuates, what manifests. The visionary author Philip K. Dick claims to have lived his own shattering of time following a dental procedure in February of 1974. He claimed to have experienced a series of intense hallucinations and downloads that he spent the rest of his life trying to decode. In his series of visions that he called 2374, he claimed to see two different realities superimposed over one another: modern California and ancient Rome. He believed he was receiving information from a vast active living intelligence system, VALIS, that existed outside of time. Dick's experience suggests that what we call fiction could be a memory of a different timeline or a pre memory of a future one. Dick, in fact, believed that his books were reports from the multidimensional field where all eras are occurring at once. I do sometimes wonder about this because in my novel IKONA, I explore these concepts in my depiction specifically of a political group at the highest levels of government that is actively investigating possible potential futures. They're investigating the architecture of timelines to see which one leads to a cure for the virus, which is depopulating humanity 100 years into the future. This is my fictional story. In our world, we do see the digital footprints of these kind of time travel experiment theories online, rumors of time shifting experiments, even individuals who claim that either they have time traveled or that they've met travelers from the future. And while we may never have proof in the materialist sense, or maybe we will, the revelation is already here from the lived experience of many. The future does seem to be a frequency, and some people can tune their dial to begin to embody that future now. But for the purposes of this podcast and my evolving paradigm, it's really all about consciousness. We often think of time travel as a sci fi trope involving portals and aliens, but I think that the evidence shows rather that it's actually a technology of consciousness. If we live in a nonlinear field, we don't need a machine to visit the future. We just need to change our resonance. I use this term resonance in my novel because often people say frequency, but for me, resonance is about much more than a number on a dial. It's an energy and an intention we inhabit. Resonance captures that more clearly for you, for me. Um, I think we tune in by quieting the noise of the mundane, so called horizontal world and asking, what resonance does this evolved version of me inhabit? And then, if we can feel that sensation in our bodies, like for example, calm, an expanded heart, clear vision, then we're no longer waiting for the future. We're pulling it into the now, effectively becoming the future memory that guides our own evolution. With these timeline possibilities increasingly supported by the post materialist physics of the 20th and 21st centuries, we have to look at the architecture of our own lives. If we can reach the future, if time is not a narrow hallway but a vertical stack, a vertical elevator, then there are many possible futures, and we are standing at a massive collective choice point where we have access to an entire landscape of potential nows. It's my argument that the shattering of our modern systems, the wars, the failing structures, the breakdown of our shared stories, is essentially a timeline break, that we've reached a point where the horizontal path is no longer visible. This is precisely when the vertical opens up. The non-linear maps charted by Gurdjieff, Bachelard, Gebser, Merton all emerged from the ruins of previous eras. These thinkers found the vertical axis when the horizontal world was in pieces. We see this same architecture in somatic therapy. When we drop into the body and touch a past memory that feels 100% alive, we have stepped off of the horizontal track. We are on the vertical. The trauma is not back there in some kind of sequence. It is a resonance on a different floor of the building, and we are currently tuned into it. The shattering of our present is the invitation to go beyond linearity, that narrow hallway, and tap into something infinite. And is that infinite possibility? If we can choose a floor, to use the elevator metaphor, we can choose the one of peace and restoration. We can choose the version of humanity that has solved the pressing issues of poverty, war, and access to safety, resources, and peace. We do this through a collective shift in our morphic field, a healing that changes human behavior en masse. We are the human equivalent of the blue tit birds piercing the foil of the milk cans, as Sheldrake wrote about. As I've mentioned in a previous episode, we are learning a new way to pierce the veil of our own limitations. In my novel Ikona, the characters refer to Shambhala. Now, this is the legendary kingdom where the physical and spiritual realms intersect, supposedly. It's a blueprint for a future golden age, and this Shambhala frequency is what my heroes are attempting to align to. Now, I wrote the outline for this novel, including the global pandemic. I wrote it in 2012, years before it happened. Was I seeing the future like Philip K. Dick, or was I seeing the future in a novel that was about seeing the future? Well, I will leave that for our actual future to unveil. In my story, in any case, the choice point comes down to resonance. But a vital disclaimer: I'm not talking about manifestation or trying to get to a future we desire. I'm talking about a frequency the planet shares, a collective choice point rooted in personal reality. So here's my belief, what I want to bring to the conversation here. I think that premonitions are data. They are a reading of the current field of possibility, not a prophecy set in stone. Premonitions are what happens when the mind stops being linear and starts perceiving the broader field. And maybe you've had this experience where you've seen a psychic and there is a mention of a future, and some things happen and some things don't happen. And I always think, in the moment of that reading, the best anyone can do, even the most talented psychic, is to see where you're headed, what choice point you're at right now, and what future you're aligning to if life continues as it is now. Future memory seems to me to be the North Star for our current planetary shift. When millions of people evolve, healing their own wounds, awakening their bodies, they shift the collective field. The new human is grounded and acutely aware of their impact on that field. We can use future memory to keep us honest about the resonance we're holding. We can draw on that future memory to keep us motivated while the old world structures collapse. As for how this future human will come into existence, well, partly that's my motivation with my interviews, which happen in season two, and some of the embodiment ideas and the practical solutions and approaches that I envision discovering or sharing in season three. But what I can say at this moment in time is it seems very clear to me that the shattering of our current world just might be the birth canal for this new human architecture. So, in today's episode, we have reached the edge of the future. We've realized that the Shambhala frequency, that vision of a coherent, multidimensional Earth, is a potential current reality that is reaching back through time to guide us. We've discovered that when we listen to the future, we might find the blueprint for who we need to become today. But as any elder knows, birth is a messy process. You can't build the new architecture until the ground has been cleared. In our next episode, The Death of the Old World, Grounding Through the Collapse, we move into the sixth threshold, the collective shadow. We're going to step out of the love and light bubble and get real about the shattering. We'll explore the geopolitics of collapse and the non benign forces, these evil, toxic forces that are currently resisting our evolution. I'm going to share how the upheaval in my novel Ikona might be a direct mirror of the upheaval in our streets and our systems. We'll explore the discovery that evolutionary pressure might be meant to be uncomfortable, that it might just be the labor pains of a planet birthing the new. In my next episode, I'm going to ask you the most grounded question of this series. Can you stay in your body and can you stay in love while the old structures of the world dissolve? I'll see you in the field where the real work begins. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I am opening just 3 spots for my 90-day structural recalibration one-on-one container. This work sits entirely outside of my traditional, more clinical model, allowing me to bring my full multidimensional toolkit from somatic neural rewiring to evolutionary astrology to shamanic practices to bring it directly to your own personal process. Because my focus is shifting towards my book and this podcast, I'm only offering these intensive cycles through the end of this year, through the end of 2026. So if you're navigating a shattering in your own life now and you're ready to inhabit a version of yourself that lives on the other side, the details of my program and the application link is in the show notes. And don't forget to join the inner circle for fans of this podcast and my novel, IKONA. Membership is free at ikonathecommunity.com. And if you have a chance, I would love for you to rate this show and leave a review. Thank you so much for traveling with me today, everyone.